The sun had barely begun its climb over the dense Louisiana tree line, casting long golden streaks across the sprawling plantation. Spanish moss hung from the ancient oaks like ethereal curtains, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of wet earth mingling with the faint aroma of tobacco and freshly churned soil. In the distance, the grand mansion loomed, its white columns gleaming against the early light, a symbol of wealth, power, and the secrets that hid behind its ornate walls. That morning, however, something unusual disturbed the rhythm of the plantation, a ripple of curiosity, whispered in hushed tones among the workers. A new slave had arrived, but she was unlike any they had seen before. She emerged from the wagon like a vision, stepping onto the dusty yard with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Her skin glowed under the sun, a rich contrast to the cotton dresses of the other slaves, and her eyes, sharp, alert, and unflinchingly observant, moved across the grounds as if she had known every inch of it before ever setting foot there. There was a spark of something in her gaze, a quiet defiance intertwined with curiosity. And though she bowed when introduced to the master and his family, there was a weight to her presence that made even the seasoned overseer pause. Something about her felt dangerous, though no one could yet articulate why. The plantation's routine hummed around her, the rhythmic sounds of labor, the thud of the plow, the soft rustle of cotton plants brushing against one another, the distant barking of a dog, melding with the morning. She did not rush, she did not stumble, she moved with a measured elegance, observing, learning, cataloguing everything she saw. Each glance was calculated, every small gesture had intention. The other slaves watched her with a mix of awe and unease. They had seen many new arrivals over the years, but none had carried themselves with such quiet confidence, nor with the aura that seemed to say they understood far more than they let on. The master, a tall man with a stern jaw and a reputation for both ruthlessness and meticulous control, noticed her immediately. He had seen countless slaves come and go, each one quickly molded into obedience, each one fading into the background of the plantation's hierarchy. But her presence was different. She was not afraid of him. Her eyes met his without flinching, and a fleeting, enigmatic smile brushed her lips, a subtle signal that perhaps she was not merely another tool to be owned. It was enough to unsettle him, though he would never admit it openly. There was curiosity in his gaze, laced with suspicion, and for the first time in years he felt the stirrings of something he had long kept buried, uncertainty. The morning progressed, and the new arrival began her first tasks. She was assigned the usual work, the chores every new slave endured, sweeping the kitchens, fetching water, tending to the stables. But, even in these mundane activities, she performed with an uncanny attentiveness. She listened to the whispers of the other slaves, catching fragments of conversations, small clues about the household's inner workings. Every glance she stole, every subtle question she asked, seemed to map the plantation's hidden corners. She noted the servants' routines, the way the overseer moved, the timing of the master's private excursions. She was learning, always learning, but in a way that seemed effortless, almost natural. By mid-morning, the curiosity surrounding her had grown palpable. In the fields, workers paused to glance at her, murmurs rippling like waves through the rows of cotton. "Who is she?" one whispered to another. "Where did she come from? She doesn't look afraid of anything." Even the older slaves, seasoned by years of hardship and distrust, felt a shiver of unease. There was intelligence in her movements, a subtle awareness that suggested she was more than she appeared, a mind always calculating, always watching. No one knew yet what secret she carried, but all sensed that her arrival would not go unnoticed for long. The master, meanwhile, began to take a more personal interest. He summoned her to the mansion, ostensibly to instruct her in the household's expectations. She entered the grand hall with poise, her eyes absorbing the high ceilings, the polished wood, and the ornate chandeliers that hung like frozen flames above her. Every detail seemed to register in her mind. The placement of paintings, the slight crack in the master's favorite chair, the faint scent of lavender masking the stronger odors of the kitchen and stables below. She listened carefully to his instructions, nodding obediently, but there was an undercurrent to her compliance, a subtle, unspoken understanding that she was not merely a passive participant in this life. As the master spoke of rules and duties, she allowed herself a momentary, imperceptible smirk. It was brief, almost invisible, but it did not escape his notice entirely. Something in her demeanor was unnerving. She seemed to understand far more than she should, absorbing every word, every gesture, every subtle inflection in his tone. It was as if she were mapping not just the task she was given, but the very soul of the household, its fears, its hypocrisies, its concealed truths. The master tried to maintain his composure, but a tiny seed of doubt had been planted, a sensation that perhaps he had underestimated her in ways that could prove dangerous. By noon, she had begun to interact with the other slaves more openly. She asked questions with the guise of curiosity, learning the intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and fears that held the plantation together. Her beauty drew attention, certainly, but it was her intelligence and her subtle, almost imperceptible confidence that commanded respect. The other slaves, initially wary, found themselves both admiring her and fearing her at the same time. They could not put into words why, but they sensed that she was capable of things far beyond what the eye could see, that beneath her calm exterior lay a mind sharp enough to pierce through the plantation's many layers of secrecy. As the sun reached its peak, casting harsh shadows across the yard, she paused near the edge of the fields to rest, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes, dark and calculating, swept across the plantation, lingering on the mansion, the overseer's house, the workers toiling in the sun, and finally on the master himself, who was observing from the veranda. It was a look that carried weight, one that suggested she had already begun to understand more than she let on. In that moment, a subtle tension hung in the air, like the calm before a storm. Everyone who saw her could feel it, the knowledge that this seemingly quiet arrival was not just another addition to the labor force. Something had changed, and the plantation itself seemed to sense it. Even the animals appeared to react to her presence. Horses in the stable shifted nervously as she passed. Dogs that normally barked without hesitation fell silent, as if recognizing a shift in the energy that surrounded her. Nature itself seemed attuned to the aura she carried, an aura that was both alluring and dangerous. It was clear, even in these early hours, that she was not a slave in the ordinary sense. She had arrived with purpose, with intent, and with a mind capable of seeing the world in ways others could not. And for those who had long held the power here, those who believed that themselves untouchable, this was a signal. The rules were about to change, and the quiet hum of the plantation would soon give way to something far more unpredictable. By late afternoon, whispers about her arrival had reached even the upper floors of the mansion. The master's wife, curious and cautious, had taken note of her striking beauty and composed demeanor. There was an elegance in her posture, a subtle command over the room even without words. The children, wide-eyed and intrigued, dared to watch her from a distance, sensing an unspoken story in the way she moved and observed. She was already leaving an impression on every corner of the plantation, her arrival impossible to ignore, her presence impossible to underestimate. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds, the slave retreated for a brief moment to the edge of the river that ran behind the mansion. She knelt by the water, tracing patterns in the mud, her reflection shimmering on the surface. Her eyes were distant, thoughtful, as though she were contemplating more than the day's tasks, perhaps the secrets she would uncover, the plans she would enact, the power she might quietly wield. In that reflection, one could see not just a beautiful young woman, but a mind alive with strategy, patience, and a quiet determination that would soon shake the very foundations of the plantation. Even as the night began to fall, with the cicadas humming and the fireflies beginning their nightly dance, the sense of unease lingered. Everyone on the plantation felt it in their bones. The arrival of this enigmatic slave had changed everything. The world they knew, the carefully constructed hierarchies and secrets, were now under silent scrutiny. She had arrived with the sun, but by nightfall it was clear she had already begun her quiet conquest. Not with force, but with presence, intel, legends, and an unsettling air that nothing and no one could ignore. And so began the tale of a slave who was anything but ordinary, a mind cloaked in obedience yet brimming with cunning, whose arrival would mark the first step in uncovering truths that many feared to acknowledge, and secrets that even the master himself had hoped would remain buried forever. The morning after her arrival, the new slave moved through the plantation with a subtle purpose, one that did not go unnoticed by the master. From the veranda, he watched her navigate the grounds, noting the way her eyes lingered on corners, doorways, and servants' quarters, the way her posture shifted when she approached areas marked off-limits to most. At first, he dismissed it as curiosity, perhaps the harmless curiosity of someone new to the plantation. Yet, the longer he observed, the more he realized that her interest was not casual. She noticed details he had long assumed were invisible, the faint scuff marks along the floors of the hallway, the slight misalignment of furniture in his private office, the way certain doors clicked shut more securely than others. It unsettled him, not because she was strong or overtly bold, but because she saw, understood, and registered everything. There was intelligence in her observation, and that intelligence was dangerous. The plantation, grand as it was, had always relied on secrecy. Wealth, power, and influence were carefully protected, hidden behind the polite faces of household staff and the obedient labor of slaves. The master himself had built his reputation not just on his family's fortune, but on his ability to maintain control, to keep his misdeeds concealed from the world. He had long cultivated a network of silence among his servants, an unspoken agreement that certain things would remain hidden. Those who tried to challenge this structure or pry too deeply, had vanished into obscurity, quietly removed or punished in ways that left no trace. It was a delicate balance, and he had been an expert at maintaining it, until now. The slave, however, seemed immune to the subtle power plays he had perfected over decades. She moved through the household as if she understood not only the visible structure, but the invisible one as well. When she carried a tray of food to the master's study, her eyes scanned the room, taking in the ledger books tucked beneath the desk, the slightly ajar drawers, and the papers stacked too high on the shelves. She noticed the absence of dust in certain corners, the faint marks left by hurriedly closed doors, and even the faint smell of ink that seemed stronger near one particular stack of documents. Each detail told her a story, clues of secrets kept, of sins committed in the quiet hours when no one dared enter the study. In the weeks that followed, her curiosity became more than observation, it transformed into quiet investigation. She asked seemingly innocent questions to the other slaves, questions that would elicit stories, confessions, and rumors. She learned of strange behaviors among the master's closest allies, of servants who were oddly loyal or unusually fearful. She discovered which doors were off-limits, which rooms triggered sudden tension, and which servants would avert their eyes when certain topics arose. Every answer, every hesitation, added a piece to the puzzle she was assembling. Yet she never revealed her own intentions, keeping her mind carefully veiled behind the calm demeanor she had perfected since her arrival. The master, meanwhile, remained unaware of how much she understood. He continued his routines, confident that the careful walls he had built would remain unbreached. Yet cracks were beginning to appear. One morning he noticed a ledger was slightly out of place on his desk. A drawer he was certain had been locked the night before stood slightly ajar, and a servant, who had been loyal for years, looked momentarily startled when he passed. He dismissed these as trivial mistakes, products of fatigue or oversight, but the unease lingered. There was a tension in the air he could not explain, a feeling that the balance of control he had relied upon was shifting. By mid-morning, the new slave's intelligence began to manifest in subtler ways. She positioned herself near the master's office during moments of conversation, listening to the voices that floated through the thin walls, noting inconsistencies in tone and hesitation in speech. She learned of the master's secret meetings, the silent arrangements made in the dead of night, and the coded messages exchanged between him and certain visitors. every whisper, every subtle clue was catalogued in her mind. She did not rush, she did not make a misstep. Her patience was part of her strategy, allowing the master to believe he was still in control while she quietly mapped the network of lies and concealments that had maintained his authority for so long. The master's secret, however, was not only a matter of paperwork or hidden meetings. It was personal, buried in the quiet corners of his life where no outsider dared to tread. There were letters locked in chests, envelopes filled with confessions, and artifacts whose meaning only he understood. These items were carefully concealed, meant to remain unseen, and their revelation could ruin him completely. Yet the slave's presence created a subtle vulnerability. She watched how he moved when retrieving these items, how his eyes flickered nervously when certain subjects arose, and how his tone hardened or softened depending on who was near. Each small reaction was a window into the hidden life he believed no one could access. One afternoon, the slave was tasked with cleaning the master's study, a privilege that came with risk. She entered with a broom in hand, moving deliberately and observing. Her eyes fell on a small compartment in the desk, cleverly disguised, that even the master had overlooked during casual inspections. With careful hands, she noted the hinges, the slight unevenness of the wood, and the faint scratch marks that suggested frequent use. She did not open it yet. Such an act would be too bold, but she remembered every detail, storing it for the moment when she could act without drawing attention. Her intelligence extended beyond observation into understanding human behavior. She recognized the subtleties of fear, loyalty, and deception. When a servant hesitated to speak in her presence, she did not pressure them, but instead waited, allowing the silence to work its way into a confession. When another tried to mislead her, she caught the inconsistencies immediately, storing them for later. Every interaction was a study in manipulation, a game played without revealing her own hand. By blending in, pretending obedience, and carefully controlling her own expressions, she made others underestimate her completely. Meanwhile, the master's family remained oblivious to the storm brewing around them. His wife continued her daily routines, unaware of the subtle shifts in attention her husband gave the new slave. The children played, laughing and screaming across the plantation grounds, untouched by the tension in the air. Even the overseer, confident in his authority, failed to notice the small ways the new arrival had begun to influence the household's rhythm. She was everywhere and nowhere, always observing, always calculating. It was during one quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the moss-covered trees and the first stars began to shimmer, that she uncovered her first major clue. The master had left a letter carelessly on his desk, thinking it was hidden behind a stack of papers. She noticed it immediately, her hands steady, her mind racing. The envelope bore his seal, and the faint scent of ink hinted at its urgency. She did not open it in haste. Instead, she memorized its position, its details, the subtle signs that suggested its importance. This letter, she realized, might hold the key to the secret that had been so carefully protected for years. Over the following days, she began piecing together patterns. She noticed the timing of his private excursions, the servants who seemed unusually nervous at certain hours, and the way he interacted with particular visitors who came to the plantation under the guise of business. The puzzle was complex, layered with deceit and carefully constructed lies, but her mind, sharp and patient, began to unravel it thread by thread. She recognized that the secret was not just about power or wealth, it was personal, something that could destroy reputations and lives if exposed. Her understanding of the master's secret grew deeper still when she noticed small inconsistencies in his behavior toward his family. He smiled at them in the presence of others, but there were fleeting moments when anger, fear, or shame crossed his features in private. She observed the way he handled money, how he avoided certain conversations, and how he lingered on particular rooms in the mansion longer than necessary. Every detail confirmed what she had begun to suspect. The master's life was carefully curated to hide a truth that was dangerous, perhaps even deadly if revealed. The tension between observation and concealment became a daily game. She moved through the plantation with an appearance of obedience, but every glance, every step was calculated. Her beauty and calm demeanor served as a mask, allowing her to gain trust, access, and insight. Meanwhile, the master, confident in his control, continued routines that only reinforced his own sense of security. He did not yet understand that the very presence he tolerated was actively dismantling the barriers he had erected to protect his secret. By the end of the month, she had mapped almost every corner of the plantation, every habit of the master, and every subtle pattern in the household. She knew which servants could be trusted, which were too fearful or too loyal to reveal anything, and which would unwittingly provide her with valuable information. The secret she sought was within reach, and she had positioned herself perfectly to uncover it. Patience, observation, and quiet cunning had brought her to this point, and she was ready to take the next step. Even in the dead of night, she remained vigilant. While the rest of the plantation slept under the heavy blankets of summer, she lingered near windows, doors, and pathways, watching for movements, listening for whispers, and memorizing details. The moonlight traced the shadows of the mansion and the surrounding fields, highlighting areas she would later explore in more depth. Her mind worked tirelessly, assembling a plan, understanding risks, and preparing for the moment when she would finally confront the secret that had remained hidden for so long. The master's hidden life, carefully curated over decades, was beginning to unravel before her eyes. Each step she took, each observation she made, brought her closer to exposing the truth. She was patient, deliberate, and precise. And though the master believed himself untouchable, unaware of the silent storm gathering within his household, the day was coming when his secret would no longer be his own. The quiet, enigmatic slave who had arrived so unassumingly had already begun to change everything. The balance of power was shifting, and the plantation, with all its grandeur and hidden sins, would never be the same. By the time the slave had mapped the intricate network of secrets and hidden behaviors within the plantation, she realized that direct confrontation was far too dangerous. The master, shrewd and careful, had built his life around control, and no one dared challenge him outright. To expose the truth without putting herself at immediate risk, she needed a plan, a method so cunning that it would allow her to act invisibly while everyone else remained blind to her intentions. That plan became clear in her mind one quiet evening as the moon cast pale silver shadows across the mansion grounds. She would pretend to be crazy. It was a bold decision, one that required impeccable timing and flawless execution. She did not intend to feign madness in the overt, theatrical way that might attract suspicion. Instead, her act would be subtle, unpredictable, and unsettling, enough to make the master and the household underestimate her, to dismiss her observations, and to leave doors open that would otherwise remain locked. Madness, she knew, had a unique power. It was both feared and ignored. People assumed that those deemed crazy could not understand, could not plan, could not manipulate. If she played the role perfectly, she could move freely within the household, observe freely, and provoke reactions that would reveal hidden truths. Her first step was to establish the act. During her daily chores, she began to behave in ways that appeared slightly erratic. She hummed unfamiliar tunes under her breath while sweeping the floors, muttered half-formed thoughts to herself, and occasionally laughed at moments that seemed incongruous with the situation. She stumbled at odd intervals, spilled water deliberately, and dropped objects she carried as if distracted by forces invisible to others. Every gesture was carefully controlled. She never overdid it, never allowed the act to appear deliberate. To an outsider, she appeared distracted, a little fragile, even a touch unbalanced, but always captivating, drawing attention without inviting suspicion about her intelligence. The household's reaction was immediate. Servants whispered behind her back, some shaking their heads in pity, others exchanging uneasy glances. The overseer frowned, uncertain whether to correct her or leave her antics alone. The master, initially perplexed, allowed himself a brief smirk. He believed he had seen through her, thinking that her eccentricities were mere naivety or nervousness. He did not yet comprehend the depth of her cunning, the precision with which she had orchestrated every small act. Over the following days, she perfected her performance. She would mutter cryptic statements while passing through the kitchen, carefully choosing words that hinted at observation without revealing her purpose. Sometimes she would laugh at the sight of the master himself, not cruelly, but in a way that suggested she perceived a private joke no one else could understand. Her expressions shifted quickly, blending fear, delight, confusion, and amusement in moments so brief that the mind of the observer could not pin them down. People began to question their own perceptions, wondering if they had truly seen her behave in a certain way or if it had been imagined. This unpredictability became her greatest tool. The master, once confident in his control, began to second-guess himself. He noticed her standing near his private study at unusual times, speaking to the servants in soft, seemingly nonsensical phrases. Sometimes she would pace the veranda at midnight, her eyes glinting in the moonlight, muttering fragments of what sounded like dreams or riddles. The master assumed these were harmless quirks of a fragile mind. He never suspected that every movement, every word, was carefully designed to provoke reactions, to create openings, to coax secrets from those around her. She also learned the power of suggestion. By pretending to misunderstand commands or mishear instructions, she drew attention to areas others avoided. A misplaced broom here, an accidentally dropped letter there. Each act seemed clumsy, yet each strategically revealed vulnerabilities in the household. Servants unconsciously disclosed information they would have otherwise kept hidden, thinking she could not comprehend or remember. Even the master, believing her unbalanced, allowed small lapses in caution, leaving doors ajar, drawers unlocked and papers exposed. Her most daring act came during a day when the master had invited a small group of trusted associates to the mansion. They gathered in the grand hall, discussing matters of trade and inheritance, unaware that her mind was fully present, cataloguing every word, gesture, and subtle glance. She moved among them with exaggerated clumsiness, spilling water from a pitcher and knocking over a chair, laughing inappropriately at a remark no one else found amusing. The room's attention shifted to her apparent fragility, and the conversation's secrets spilled out in the gaps she created. A misdirected question here, a startled comment there, revealed alliances and fears that had been carefully masked. By evening, her act of madness had become legendary within the household. Servants spoke of her in hushed tones, describing her eccentricities with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some avoided her, uncertain whether she was harmless or dangerous. Others sought her out, curious about the fragments of insight she seemed to possess, though none dared question her motives directly. The master, confident in his ability to control those around him, remained unaware that threads of his carefully constructed life were beginning to unravel at the hands of a mind he had dismissed as erratic. Her performance required more than erratic behavior. It demanded perfect observation. She watched every reaction, noting micro-expressions, subtle gestures, and the slightest changes in tone. She learned which phrases provoked fear, which actions triggered suspicion, and which circumstances made others reveal more than they intended. Each piece of information was carefully stored in her mind, catalogued for later use. Her madness became a lens through which she could perceive the true nature of the household, revealing truths invisible to those who assumed she was incapable of understanding. The master's secret, which had been hidden so meticulously, began to emerge through her subtle provocations. She guided conversations with servants, planting seemingly nonsensical comments that drew out confessions. A careless remark about a locked drawer, a cryptic question about a past event, a sudden outburst of laughter at the mention of a name. All these maneuvers forced cracks in the facade he had built. The household, distracted by her unpredictable behavior, unwittingly allowed her to observe, analyze, and prepare for the moment of revelation. Even the animals seemed attuned to her performance. Dogs barked when she approached certain rooms, horses shied away from her presence in the stables, and birds flew into sudden alarm at her passage. It was as if nature itself recognized her strategy, responding to the tension she created. Her madness was not just an act. It was a force that altered the rhythm of the plantation, bending reality to her advantage while keeping her true intentions concealed. As weeks passed, the master's confidence began to falter. He noticed the small inconsistencies in the household that she had orchestrated, letters left exposed, drawers slightly ajar, servants' nervous glances. He began to question whether her behavior was truly madness or a clever manipulation, but by then it was too late. The slave had already positioned herself to act without detection. Her act had lulled the household into complacency, leading them to underestimate her in every possible way. She had become invisible in plain sight, a ghost whose every move went unchallenged because it appeared unimportant. Her most audacious maneuver occurred one stormy night. The master retired to his private study, confident that the household was secure. The rain pelted the roof, thunder shaking the walls, while she moved silently through the mansion. Pretending to be frightened by the storm, she stumbled into the hall, murmuring incoherent phrases and clutching a candle. The servants paid her no attention, assuming she was terrified and fragile. Yet in her hand she carried the tools to uncover the master's most guarded secrets. Letters, ledgers, and documents she had memorized over weeks of careful observation. With a mixture of bravery and subtlety, she navigated the study, positioning herself to access the hidden compartment that contained the truth. The act of madness allowed her to accomplish what would have been impossible otherwise. No one suspected that beneath the guise of unpredictability lay a mind working with razor-sharp precision. She observed the master's habits, his fears, and his weaknesses, using them to orchestrate situations where secrets would surface naturally. A misplaced key, a sudden knock, a casual comment, all were part of her strategy. By pretending to be crazy, she had gained freedom within the household, creating opportunities that would have been impossible for any ordinary slave. Her performance was not without risk. One misstep could have exposed her, leading to punishment or worse. Yet she moved with a confidence born of preparation and intelligence. Each erratic gesture, each whispered remark, was carefully calibrated to provoke specific reactions. She tested boundaries, measured responses, and adapted in real time. Every instance of apparent madness was a calculated move in a larger game of revelation, designed to peel back layers of secrecy one by one. By the end of the second month, her act had transformed the dynamics of the plantation. The master, once confident in his dominance, grew wary and defensive. Servants, previously obedient, began to question their perceptions, unsure whether her behavior was true madness or a clever ruse. Fear, curiosity, and confusion filled the household, creating an environment ripe for revelation. Through the illusion of instability, she had gained the ultimate advantage. She could observe without obstruction, influence without exposure, and manipulate without detection. The stage was set. The master's hidden life, meticulously guarded for years, was now exposed to scrutiny he did not anticipate. The slave's crazy trick had not only earned her freedom of movement and observation, but had shifted the power balance within the household. The very act that seemed to diminish her in the eyes of others had, in fact, amplified her ability to uncover the truth. She had turned perception into a weapon, using it to quietly dismantle the defenses of a man who believed himself untouchable. In the quiet hours of the night, as the storm subsided and the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, she paused to reflect on the progress she had made. Her act of madness had been perfected, her strategy unfolding exactly as she had planned. The master's secret, hidden behind layers of deception, was now within reach, and she was prepared to reveal it in a way that would leave no room for doubt or denial. Patience, intelligence, and courage had brought her to this moment. The household, distracted by the illusions she created, had unwittingly opened the door to truths that could no longer be contained. And so, under the guise of a mind unhinged, she waited. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word was a step toward exposing the forbidden secret that the master had believed would remain hidden forever. Her madness was not real, but its consequences would be devastatingly true. She had become both observer and orchestrator, a silent force reshaping the fate of the plantation with every calculated move. The moment of revelation was near, and nothing would be the same once the truth emerged. The night the slave chose to act, the mansion seemed quieter than usual, as if the house itself anticipated the storm that was about to erupt. Candles flickered in their sconces, throwing wavering shadows along the walls, and the rain outside pattered softly against the windows, masking the faintest of sounds. She moved with deliberate caution, her steps silent on the polished wooden floors, her eyes scanning the rooms she had memorized so meticulously. Every detail she had observed, every secret she had catalogued, would come together tonight. The act of madness, perfected over weeks, had lulled the household into complacency. No one suspected that behind the fragile, erratic demeanor, a mind sharp as a blade had been silently orchestrating the evening's events. She began by positioning herself in the hallway near the master's private study, her erratic behavior drawing attention just enough to misdirect the servants from her true purpose. She muttered fragmented phrases under her breath, occasionally laughing at imagined sights or sounds, never drawing suspicion beyond the usual discomfort her act provoked. Servants avoided her, believing she was unstable, while the master, absorbed in his own routines and confident in her supposed madness, allowed himself brief distractions he would normally never permit. Every step, every glance, every gesture was part of a careful choreography designed to expose the truth without leaving traces of her involvement. The master sat in his study, unaware of the proximity of the one who had observed him so thoroughly for weeks. His hands trembled slightly as he handled letters and ledgers, documents he had long considered secure. He prided himself on control, on the ability to keep his sins hidden from both the household and the outside world. Yet tonight, the illusion he relied upon was about to collapse. The slave's calculated presence created openings he did not notice. A door left slightly ajar, a misplaced envelope, the subtle movement of papers across the desk. Each seemingly trivial detail was a thread she would pull to unravel the fabric of his secret. She began by retrieving the first clue, a ledger he had neglected to lock properly. She pretended to stumble as she entered the study, her eyes darting nervously across the Boom! The master glanced up, assuming she had lost her mind again, and returned to his papers, unaware that she now held the very key to his hidden deeds. She examined the pages carefully, memorizing names, dates, and transactions, each number and signature pointing toward illicit arrangements, hidden deals, and betrayals, carefully disguised as routine business. Her mind worked quickly, organizing the information into patterns that even the master had overlooked. The next step required subtle manipulation of the household itself. She positioned herself where servants would notice her odd movements and unbalanced demeanor. As they reacted, some with concern, others with frustration, they inadvertently revealed information. A passing remark about a locked chest here, a fleeting mention of a visitor there, a nervous glance in the direction of a particular room, all these fragments of knowledge, once unnoticed, now became valuable pieces of the puzzle. She collected them silently, cataloging details that would allow her to reconstruct the secret completely. Her performance of madness also served as a shield. The master, though intelligent, failed to see her true capability because he assumed she could not comprehend the gravity of the material she was now handling. Each time she laughed or muttered incoherent phrases, he dismissed her entirely, believing she was harmless. But behind the laughter was precise calculation, and behind the incoherence was meticulous observation. Every movement was purposeful. Every act a step toward revealing the truth he had worked so hard to conceal. By midnight, the culmination of her efforts was near. She had identified the hidden compartment in the master's desk, the one that contained letters and documents exposing not only illicit business dealings, but personal betrayals he had never intended anyone to discover. The compartment's lock as intricate, designed to withstand casual attempts, but she had memorized its mechanism from previous observations. With careful hands, she manipulated the lock, her heart steady despite the tension that filled the room. She opened it just enough to access the contents without disturbing the surrounding papers. In that moment she was poised between success and disaster, yet her confidence and preparation guided her through with precision, As she extracted the documents, a servant passing nearby paused, sensing something unusual. She maintained her act, speaking in disjointed sentences and laughing softly to herself, ensuring that her actions appeared harmless. The servant, unsure of what to make of her behavior, moved along without intervening. The master remained oblivious, absorbed in his own routine, convinced that the supposed madness of the slave could not threaten his control. The illusion had worked perfectly. No eyes truly observed her actions, and no one suspected the gravity of what was unfolding. With the documents in hand, she began the careful work of revealing the secret. She strategically placed evidence where key members of the household could discover it without directly implicating her. A letter slipped onto the master's pillow, a ledger left partially visible in the common room, a note subtly positioned where the overseer might notice it. All calculated placements designed to provoke curiosity, fear, and ultimately confrontation. She understood human psychology intimately. The master's carefully maintained hierarchy would crumble under the weight of his own secrets once they were exposed through these seemingly accidental discoveries. The reactions began almost immediately. A servant found a ledger that hinted at misdeeds previously unknown, their eyes widening as they connected names, dates, and sums. Another noticed the letters, the ink still, faintly fresh, and instinctively hid them for later, not realizing that concealment would only amplify the eventual revelation. Small whispers spread throughout the household, growing in intensity as more people stumbled upon fragments of truth. By morning, the air was thick with tension, a sense of impending confrontation lingering over every room. The master, still unaware of the scope of what had been uncovered, sensed unease but could not pinpoint its source. Throughout the night, she observed quietly, maintaining her act, allowing the chaos to unfold while she remained an unassuming participant. Her performance ensured that suspicion never fell upon her. She laughed softly at moments of confusion, muttered fragmented phrases that seemed unrelated, and moved unpredictably, drawing attention away from the crucial discoveries she had orchestrated. The household, absorbed in its own growing alarm, failed to notice the subtle hand guiding events. By mid-morning, the master finally encountered the first undeniable evidence of his exposed secret. He entered a room expecting order, only to find letters and documents arranged in a way that revealed the truth. Panic flickered across his face, a reaction he struggled to conceal. The realization hit him in pieces. Transactions he had hidden, arrangements he had believed invisible, personal betrayals he had thought secure, all now visible. His household watched, whispering among themselves, piecing together the revelations. Every glance, every gesture, every reaction confirmed the magnitude of the exposure. The slave, maintaining her act, observed from a distance. Her plan had unfolded exactly as intended. She had not confronted him directly, she had not challenged him openly. Instead, she had allowed his own secrets to reveal themselves under the weight of careful manipulation. The chaos in the household, the confusion, and fear were the direct results of her strategic planning. The master, desperate and disoriented, had no one to blame but the circumstances created by his own oversight and the brilliance of the woman he had underestimated. In the hours that followed, the full extent of the secret came to light. Servants spoke cautiously but openly, recounting small pieces of information they had observed over time. Each fragment corroborated what she had uncovered, filling in gaps and confirming patterns. The master's attempts to regain control failed repeatedly. His authority had been undermined not by force, but by careful planning, observation, and psychological insight. The household, once rigidly structured, now teetered on the edge of disorder. Her strategy relied not just on exposure, but on timing and human behavior. She had allowed events to unfold naturally, creating opportunities for discovery while ensuring her own innocence remained unquestioned. The master's secret, which had been buried for years under layers of deception and fear, was now undeniable. Documents, letters, and corroborating testimonies converged to reveal a truth he could no longer deny. The weight of exposure pressed down on the household, and even those who had once feared her now realized the extent of her cunning. As the day progressed, The master attempted to assert control, but his efforts were futile. Each move he made only further confirmed the revelations. Servants, emboldened by the evidence, began to speak more openly, filling in details he had hoped would remain hidden. The network of secrecy he had relied upon for years crumbled before him, and the realization that he had been outmaneuvered by the slave he had dismissed as crazy was a bitter and inescapable truth. The slave, observing from the shadows, allowed herself a quiet satisfaction. Her act of madness had been a weapon, a tool to manipulate perception and create opportunities that no ordinary approach could achieve. She had turned underestimation into advantage, transforming her supposed fragility into power. The revelation of the master's secret was complete, and yet she remained unexposed, her true intelligence and strategy hidden behind the guise of instability. By evening, the household was in a state of controlled chaos. The master's face, once confident and composed, now betrayed fear, anger, and disbelief. Servants moved with caution, some whispering to one another, others avoiding his gaze entirely. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the knowledge that a truth long buried had emerged, reshaping the hierarchy and dynamics of the mansion. The slave's plan had succeeded perfectly, her act of madness ensuring that the exposure occurred without risk to herself. In the quiet aftermath, she reflected on the events, her mind already analyzing the next steps. The master's secret was now public within the household, but the consequences were far from over. She had gained not only knowledge but power, the power to influence, manipulate, and control outcomes. A careful observation, patience, and cunning had dismantled years of concealment, proving that intelligence and strategy could achieve what brute force never could. The night settled over the plantation, heavy with the weight of revelation. The master, isolated in his own thoughts, could not escape the truth that had been laid bare before him. The slave, once dismissed as crazy, had not only uncovered his secret, but had done so in a manner that left him powerless to retaliate. She had reshaped the balance of power, proving that perception could be a weapon, and that even the most carefully guarded secrets were vulnerable to insight, patience, and audacity. And so, the master's forbidden truth was exposed, not through confrontation, but through cunning, observation, and the brilliant strategy of a woman who had learned that sometimes pretending to be less than you are is the greatest strength one can wield. The household would never be the same, and the legacy of that night, the night when madness revealed the hidden truth, would linger in whispers, shadows, and the knowing glances of those who understood that appearances are often deceiving and that even the quietest observer can change the course of destiny. The morning after the master's secret had been exposed, the plantation felt like a world transformed. The air, once heavy with routine and silent obedience, now buzzed with whispers, tension, and unease. Servants moved cautiously, exchanging furtive glances and hushed conversations as if the very walls had learned the truth and were quietly judging those within them. The master, pale and rigid, paced the veranda, the weight of exposure pressing on him like a storm cloud he could neither dissipate nor escape. Every carefully constructed layer of control he had maintained for years had crumbled overnight, leaving him vulnerable, exposed, and utterly powerless. The plantation, for the first time in decades, had shifted, and the person responsible for this upheaval remained unnoticed, her presence cloaked in the illusion she had meticulously crafted. The slave, whose quiet cunning had orchestrated the entire revelation, observed from a distance, appearing as she always had, slightly erratic, distracted, even fragile in the eyes of those around her. No one suspected that behind the mask of madness was a mind sharper than any in the household, one that had manipulated perception, behavior, and circumstance to achieve what force alone could never accomplish. She had watched the aftermath unfold, noting reactions, cataloging fears, and studying the ripple effects of her strategy. Every glance, every stuttered word, every shift in posture revealed the power dynamics now at play, and she absorbed it all with a quiet, calculating satisfaction. The servants, who had long operated under a rigid hierarchy enforced by fear, were the first to react openly to the exposure. They whispered in corners, trading fragments of the truth they had pieced together from scattered letters, documents, and subtle admissions. Fear and curiosity mixed in equal measure. No one dared approach the master directly with the revelations, yet the knowledge they carried was intoxicating. Each whispered conversation added layers to the growing awareness that the plantation's authority had been destabilized. Even the overseer, once confident in his control over the workers, found himself hesitant, uncertain how to navigate the rapidly changing dynamics. The power he once wielded effortlessly now felt fragile, subject to the very human vulnerabilities that the slave had so cleverly manipulated. The master himself experienced the aftermath most acutely. He had believed that secrecy, careful planning, and intimidation were enough to protect him, yet in a matter of hours the foundation of his authority had eroded. Letters that exposed personal betrayals, financial records that revealed illicit dealings, and corroborating testimonies from servants created a chain of evidence that was undeniable. He moved through the mansion with a tension that was almost visible, his shoulders tight, hands trembling slightly as he touched the surfaces he had. Once considered secure, each glance from the servants, each quiet murmur reminded him that his control was gone. The realization was bitter, and the humiliation, though subtle, burned fiercely. He had underestimated the one he had dismissed as crazy, and that miscalculation now defined the morning. Meanwhile, the slave maintained her performance, moving through the household with the same deliberate unpredictability that had become her hallmark. To the untrained eye, she remained fragile, slightly erratic and harmless, yet her presence was the axis around which the chaos rotated. She allowed the master's distress to unfold naturally, observing how he reacted, cataloguing his vulnerabilities, and noting how others began to navigate the sudden power vacuum. The cleverness of her act ensured that no suspicion fell upon her. The chaos and revelation were entirely his doing, facilitated by the cracks she had carefully created, yet executed under the guise of accidental exposure. Throughout the day, she interacted with the household subtly, planting small seeds that would influence how the master and servants responded to the new reality. She asked disjointed, seemingly innocent questions. "Did you see what was in the desk?" Or "I heard whispers last night about letters." Her fragmented phrasing suggested confusion rather than understanding, yet each utterance nudged individuals to confront, reveal, or acknowledge details they might otherwise have suppressed. In this way, she guided the progression of events without ever appearing to take direct control. The household, unaware of the strategy behind her words, moved as she had anticipated. As the sun climbed higher, the exposure reached the master's family. His wife, who had been largely unaware of the hidden activities, began to sense the tension, noticing the guarded expressions of servants and the subtle avoidance. In her husband's eyes. Questions she had previously refrained from asking now demanded answers. The children, once shielded from the household's undercurrents, sensed the unease in ways they could not articulate, picking up on hurried conversations, fleeting expressions, and the charged energy that filled every room. The revelation, though mediated through documents and testimony, permeated every corner of the mansion, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty, fear, and quiet upheaval. The slave's brilliance lay in her understanding of perception. She allowed each individual to confront the secret in their own way, never forcing acknowledgement but facilitating the process so that the truth revealed itself naturally. The master's reactions, the servants' whispers, and the family's growing awareness all served to amplify the consequences of exposure, creating an environment where the secret's impact could not be ignored. She had transformed herself from a passive observer to a silent conductor, orchestrating the reactions of an entire household without raising suspicion. The master, desperate to contain the fallout, attempted to reassert control, but his efforts only highlighted his vulnerability. He issued commands, attempted to redirect conversations, and sought to regain composure, yet each action revealed the fragility of his position. Servants, emboldened by their newfound awareness, hesitated or outright ignored instructions, and family members began to question his authority in subtle ways. Every attempt to restore order failed, reinforcing the reality that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. By afternoon, the full scope of the exposure was evident. The master's private dealings, once hidden in shadows and locked compartments, were now visible, understood, and discussed within the household. Servants referenced events and arrangements he had long believed unnoticed, recounting details with growing confidence. Each revelation eroded the authority he had relied upon, leaving him isolated in his panic and disorientation. The mansion, once a symbol of control and hierarchy, now vibrated with uncertainty and the unspoken recognition that the dynamics within its walls had fundamentally changed. The slave observed silently, noting the reactions of each individual, the micro-expressions that betrayed fear, guilt, or surprise. She catalogued the unfolding events with precision, understanding that the moment of exposure was not merely the uncovering of information, but the transformation of power itself. The master's authority, which had seemed absolute, was now subject to scrutiny, discussion, and doubt. The household, previously rigid and disciplined, had become a space of fluidity and cautious negotiation. She had achieved a remarkable feat. The revelation of a forbidden secret had shifted the power dynamic without a single overt confrontation. In the quiet moments between activity, she reflected on the broader consequences of her actions. The master's life, carefully curated over decades, was now unmasked. His relationships, his influence, and his reputation had all been destabilized, yet he remained unaware of the true architect behind the upheaval. Her performance of madness had shielded her, allowing the revelation to occur while maintaining plausible deniability. She had harnessed the power of perception, manipulation, and strategy to achieve what would have been impossible through direct action alone. By evening, the plantation had settled into a new rhythm, one that bore the unmistakable mark of her influence. Servants moved with cautious confidence. The master navigated the mansion with visible anxiety, and family members processed the changes in their own ways. The secret that had once been a source of unchallenged power now existed as a shared knowledge, reshaping interactions and hierarchies. The slave, still appearing slightly unbalanced, moved among them with the same careful unpredictability, fully aware of the leverage she now possessed. Her presence had become both stabilizing and destabilizing. Stabilizing because she maintained her act of madness, preventing the household from fully collapsing into chaos. Destabilizing because her intelligence, unseen and underestimated, had dismantled the foundation of control. Every glance she cast, every gesture, every muttered phrase reinforced her position as a silent observer and orchestrator. The household's awareness of the master's secret was complete, yet they could not trace the clever design that had facilitated it. The master, increasingly desperate, attempted to reassert dominance through authority and intimidation. He reprimanded servants, questioned family members, and tried to restore his previous routines. Yet every action was undermined by the evidence that now existed and the subtle influence of the slave's strategy. He could no longer manipulate perception. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the consequences he had long feared but never confronted. His attempts at control only highlighted his vulnerability, emphasizing the shift in power that had occurred without a single direct challenge from the architect of the upheaval. In the aftermath, the household began to adjust to its new reality. Conversations became more cautious, glances more deliberate, and interactions more measured. Servants who had once moved unquestioningly now considered the implications of every action. Family members, previously unaware of the underlying tensions, began to navigate the changed dynamics with care. The master, isolated by knowledge of his own exposed actions, became reactive, cautious, and increasingly aware that the balance he had relied upon was gone. The plantation, once a symbol of rigid hierarchy, now operated under a subtle, unspoken negotiation of power, with the slave at its center, hidden in plain sight. The brilliance of her strategy was fully revealed over the following weeks. She had not simply exposed a secret, she had reshaped the dynamics of the household, creating a reality in which her influence was undeniable yet invisible. The master, despite his intelligence, had underestimated her at every turn, and that misjudgment had allowed her to orchestrate the consequences of revelation without ever taking direct credit. Her act of madness had served as a veil, concealing a mind of extraordinary precision, and in doing so, it had ensured both her safety and her power. By nightfall, the mansion was quiet once again, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Shadows seemed longer, voices more cautious, and every glance carried the weight of knowledge and fear. The master, alone with his thoughts, confronted the reality of exposure, understanding that his secret, once thought untouchable, had been laid bare. The slave, observing from a distance, allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She had turned perception into a weapon, strategy into influence, and madness into a tool of revelation. The household, forever altered, now operated under a new understanding. Appearances are deceptive, power is fragile, and even the quietest, most underestimated observer can reshape destiny. Her victory was complete. The secret had been exposed, the balance of power had shifted, and the plantation, once rigid and predictable, now acknowledged the presence of intelligence, cunning, and strategy that could not be ignored. She had proven that true power lies not in force or intimidation, but in patience, observation, and the skillful manipulation of perception. The aftermath of the revelation was more than a moment of triumph. It was a lasting transformation, a testament to the extraordinary capability of a woman who had been dismissed, underestimated, and yet had achieved the impossible. And as the moon rose over the moss-draped oaks, casting silver light across the mansion, the slave moved quietly among the shadows, her act complete, her influence secure, and her place in the household forever transformed. The master's forbidden secret had been exposed, the consequences had rippled through every corner of the plantation, and the one who had orchestrated it all remained untouchable, a silent force shaping destiny with cunning, patience, and brilliance.